Hello everyone. This is Francesca Vigliani from Cloud Academy. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on shifting left and full stack in reality. I'd like to welcome Mark Andersen, Director of DevOps at Capital One, and Jessica Clark, Scrum Master at Capital One. Mark and Jessica are experts in the realm of DevOps, and they're here today to share their real-life experiences and give you all of the information you need to get started in your DevOps journey. Thank you for being with us today.
All right, well, thank you so much for the great introduction. We're going to go ahead and get started. Mark, I'll let you kind of kick us off.
Hi, everyone. It's Mark Andersen. Just want to introduce myself. Got my nice picture up there. Alma mater is University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. I've been at Capital One for about the last 2.5 years, and I'm the Director of DevOps and many other things at Capital One Auto Finance. So I spend a lot of time focusing on DevOps, cloud, and SRE and those processes. I'm also very big in the cloud governance space and how we do kind of our cloud automation and how that fits into the DevOps journey that we have.
And I'm Jessica Clark. I went to school in Santa College in upstate New York, for those of you that are familiar with it, near the Albany area. I've been with Capital One for 8 years, this next month in July. I've been here just a little bit. Most recently, I moved into a Scrum Master RTE role within the DevOps team, working closely with Mark Andersen, and also doing quite a bit of cloud governance as well for all of financial services tech, which is based in Plano. All right, so back to the goals of this session. So what we wanted to do today was share with you our DevOps journey so far at Capital One, along with some of our lessons learned. We are not perfect here, nor will we claim to be. So we want to make sure that we share with you guys, what we've learned so far. We also want to share with you what skills different role groups may need help with for a successful journey, or the things that they might need to know as they're going through the process. And we also want to share with you some next steps that you can apply to the real world. And since one of our goals is to share our journey here, I want to make sure that we include some elements that are in all great stories. So with that, once upon a time, in the faraway land of Plano, Texas, there was a bubbling place full of bright engineers called Capital One. So Capital One, for those that may not be familiar, we are more than just credit cards. I'm sure some of you have seen our commercials before, but we also do have auto lending, retail banking, as well as some other products. In terms of bank years, we're probably one of the youngest, if you will. We were founded in the early 90s. I believe 1994 was the date, so that would make us around 24 years old. We are all in on DevOps and public cloud. We've probably been on this journey for a little over 3 years at this point, in some way, shape, or form. And we also are actively open sourcing some of our own products, which include Hygia and Cloud Custodian. So in the world before DevOps, we saw a lot of behaviors that were less than optimal as we were working through various projects over time. So in terms of the people aspect, we ran into the scenario of having developers versus operations. There was a mindset that I'm sure some of you have encountered previously, or maybe are still living, where people felt like it was just kind of a throw it over the wall. So the developers would go through and develop their features, and then once they were done and tested it, there would be a handoff to the operations team, and those handoffs were sometimes great, sometimes blind, sometimes with errors, and it caused a lot of problems with the interaction between those two groups. We also noticed that there were different priorities based on which team you found yourself with. So our developer teams or our software engineering teams were focused on their feature delivery and wanting to get the program or project done, and not necessarily focused on, well, how are we going to support this thing, or what are some of the gotchas that we need to be aware of. whereas obviously the operations team had a different viewpoint that they were looking at things from, how do we support this? How do we bring this back if there's an error? What do we do in this scenario? And that sort of thing. And also with those two teams being distinct and separate, we had a lot of siloed skill sets. So the folks that were developers weren't necessarily privy to some of the skills or didn't necessarily have the skills that some of our operations folks did, and vice versa. In terms of speed, we had monthly releases. I have the sometimes there because that was the goal, but sometimes that didn't even happen. Things would get pushed, or we'd have to cancel a release because there were errors found. And part of this was driven by the fact that we were leveraging waterfall, and so in that methodology, we were trying to deliver large feature sets all at once. So anytime you're trying to do very large releases, there's a chance of errors or problems when you go to integrate everything together. And so we had projects that were lasting months, if not years, and the time to market or the time it would take for our customers to see some of the value of those projects was really high. And so we were definitely lacking in the speed department. In terms of quality, again, because we had such a larger scale releases and large feature sets that we were working on, there were long feedback loops for our developers. So they would go in and develop their feature sets, and then it would, once they were all done with that, they'd pass it on to testing. And by the time they maybe heard that there was an error in something that they had done, they had already started working on the next thing, and they had to try and remember what they did or try to pick things back up. And so, they didn't get that feedback of, are there any issues that need to be correcting, or, is it maybe not working as intended? So obviously this was a less than ideal environment that we found ourselves in. Had an idea for us, and that was that we could embrace DevOps to help bring peace between our developer and our operations teams. So what is DevOps? So DevOps, this is the definition from Wikipedia. So if this doesn't match your personal definition, I apologize. But really, it's the bringing together development and operations and making them more working as a unified team with the goal of shorter development cycles, increased deployment frequency, and more dependable releases. So obviously, these are all things that sound great to us. So some of the goals of DevOps, as I mentioned, are the high quality, making sure that we've got software that's secure, reliable, and usable, and performs as we intended. It's working for our end users, and those end users could be our actual external customers, or perhaps some of our folks in our call center, or maybe even some of our agents that are helping customers with their loans. And our speed in terms of making sure that we're releasing, or our release cycles are in days and weeks, not months or years. So these are all great goals and things that DevOps really strives to get us. So of course, when we want to do DevOps, how do we start on this journey? So step one is to read the Phoenix project. Obviously, that's what everyone starts out with to get familiar with the concept. But all joking aside, one of the things that is really critical as we were looking to go on our DevOps journey is to making sure that we were leveraging automation as an infrastructure as code, and then moving to the cloud, which was, really a high priority for us, because obviously in the cloud that enables our developers to be doing things a lot more quickly, have faster feedback loops. We're not waiting months to stand up servers and to get infrastructure built. So that really kind of helps us in that goal of speed. And we also want to make sure that the devs have the ability to do the things that they need to do. So whether it's having them be full stack, or that they have the ability to leverage automation to get work done. So we thought, hey, this sounds great. Let's do this. These are all things that we want, and obviously, who doesn't want better quality, things that are faster? So we started on that journey. And as we went on this journey, we really set out with a high goal of automating everything. And what we ended up finding is that we got a little bit of everything quality-wise, because all teams wanted to build their own pipelines and do their own thing. Some of them were really, really awesome. Some were, okay. At the end of the day, though, all of them were different. And so it really became a challenge because, where one team had gone through and developed their pipeline to do X, Y, and Z, the other one had done A, B, and C. So when they encountered problems, we just didn't know where to look, and it was hard to support things. It also really kind of forced our developers to become experts at everything. We had people that were trying to figure out networking and security and the areas that are, not necessarily part of their, development life. And so it just became really challenging, and we found ourselves kind of with a mixed bag of things. We also learned that certain roles had different struggles depending on what their viewpoint was of the organization. And in general, we found that, developers like to develop. They tend to not like doing networking or dealing with patching or OS issues. Don't like dealing with security when it gets in the way of doing the things that they want to do and developing awesome code. And I think this statement is true not just for developers, but probably everyone. No one likes long onboarding to tools and services. I don't think anyone likes to have to do that. I'm sure we've all encountered that in our lives before. So we learned those things specifically with the developers. We also saw that there was some challenges in terms of our Agile process and our application teams. So we had been on our Agile journey probably, I think, for the last 7 years or so. And so when we started doing this DevOps thing, all of our Scrum Masters and folks that were integral to the Agile process, weren't really sure on how to make this move. So what we found was that Scrum Masters weren't really sure how to support their teams in shifting left. What are the things that they should be looking for? What are some of the indicators that they should be watching for on their teams? How do they encourage their teams to do that sort of thing? We also found that product managers and owners, while they're awesome at understanding feature work, they aren't always sure how to prioritize non-functional needs or investment work. So when we're talking about investing time in automating pipelines or automating testing, or whatever that investment work is, they're really not sure what's the true benefit? Why do I need to do this? Where should this fall into priority with my feature development? We also found a little bit that folks thought that DevOps was replacing Agile. Both have their own jargon. So it can be kind of confusing of like, well, hey, is this, are we doing DevOps and not Agile? A little known fact, based on, or depending on who you believe on the internet, but DevOps was originally called Agile Infrastructure. So they are closely coupled, which I think leads to a little bit of the confusion. And there's a great quote that I've heard before, is that DevOps is Agile applied to teams beyond the development team. So it's really expanding the scope of Agile, but it did really cause some confusion with folks of, oh, we're not doing Agile anymore because we're doing DevOps. The other thing that we encountered was that folks thought that DevOps was that thing that those teams over on the other floor in that other building were doing. They didn't feel like it was something that they needed to be involved with, or that it was just something that those top of house teams were doing. So I think kind of one of the themes that we saw, especially with the process, the Agile process folks and our application teams, was just a general misunderstanding of what DevOps was and what role they played in adopting that mentality. So as we kind of look back, because hindsight is not 20/20, but gives us some good insights of what we would have done differently. We definitely would have wanted to make sure that we defined out what each role needed to know as we kind of embarked on that journey. and also coupling that with identifying measures to gauge how we're doing. I think that was a big challenge, and kind of continues to be a little bit of a challenge for us is, like, are we there yet? How do we know when we're there? How do we know how we're improving? What kind of measures can we use to identify that? Capital One is a very data-driven company, so anytime we can come up with a little bit of a measure just to give us some kind of indication, that's always helpful. It is difficult, though, because DevOps is more of a cultural movement than, just do X plus Y and then you get Z. So, it's sometimes hard to measure, but I think at least getting that mentality or getting some ideas of what we would be seeing to know when we had arrived. Another thing that we would have done was to further integrate our operations teams with our application teams. So while we did a lot to help bring those folks together, being in the same building or making sure that, they were interacting or having a person from the operations team assigned to be the point person for a specific application team. I think we could have done more to really bring those folks together and increase that communication. I think there were still a lot of folks that were subscribing to the throw it over the wall mentality and weren't really sure how do I start those conversations? What are some of the things that the operations folks do care about? And, whether it's ongoing, have participation in S2 discussions or whether it's doing side-by-sides or that sort of thing. I think anything that we could have done to increase those conversations would have been helpful. And the other piece that I touched on before is as we ended up with a mixed bag of pipelines and automation, I think having a common CI/CD pipeline or having reference jobs, I think would have been extremely helpful because it would have eliminated some of the confusion that we had of folks, spending their time doing different things or all trying to solve the problem in different ways. I think we are on that journey now and, have gotten a lot closer to having that commonality across the board. And what that really helps us with is when there are errors, it's a lot easier to troubleshoot because, there's single source of truth and everyone's working off of the same playbook, and so that helps everyone help each other and also gives us a better end product because folks are then they are building on that initial common pipeline and reference pipelines so that we end up with a better product overall versus everyone trying to solve the same problem separately.
So digging a little deeper on that, and especially around how do we handle not having everyone be an expert in everything, we had to figure out how do we get around that but get all the value we want out of DevOps. So we essentially looked at kind of our definition, and there's three things that really jumped out is, hey, how do we have high quality around all the testing and NFRs, right? Security and networking is just as important now as features. We want to make sure we were able to produce working software. That's what gives us the feedback, and you can see in real life, both product and development can see what they imagine, what they built, and see if it was right or not. And then also fast. I think speed is a very important piece, and it's not just speed as in, hey, I want to be a Amazon or a Facebook and a Google and deploy to prod. I don't know what their stat is, like every minute or every 10 seconds. It's more speed, even if you're a big enterprise like us, of getting that feedback back to all the teams and getting that through the pipes. That also allows you to do the smaller batch sizes and also avoid the bigger releases. So we still want, though, like you said, the agile pods to move fast, and we want kind of SME level quality around databases, networking, and security. So essentially we want it all. So we had to figure out that problem. So we really took a step back and said, hey, who do we need to optimize to? Who is the customer for this? We can't do DevOps in a silo. So if we get this right, it gives us a path forward on where do we focus our optimization on, in which groups, and where do we tune to. So to do this, we really want to optimize all the processes, the culture, what we do around the Agile pods. The reason is they're the one that are producing the product, the service, the value. And we wanted to avoid pre-optimizing to the service team's workflow, whether it's an infrastructure team, a security team, et cetera. But what does this mean? So, as service teams, we really want to treat our Agile product pods as customers. So it means talk to them, ask them for feedback, have empathy for the challenges, care about their success. In the end, that is what we're really focused on. And these teams are critically important to make that success, but we want to make sure everything we do is aligned to that. We want to understand how they work, ask them about their SDLC process, observe them in action, help identify what's slowing them down. There's nothing that can really replace seeing someone being blocked on something for a few days to appreciate how much that impacts them delivering their product or service. It's easy to hear it in email or over chat or see it in some sort of ticketing system. It's very different to see it in action and what the impact of that is. And so what we need to do is take the service team, or a special skill that we need to apply as a service team to minimize the impact of the Agile Pods workflow. So we still want all those good things. We need the deep database expertise. We need the deep security expertise, but we want it applied in a way that's the most consumable to the Agile Pods. So I wanted to kind of talk through a visualization to simplify this out. So kind of in the old way, so the Agile Pod usually has to go between teams, initiate some requests. The service teams are engaged in a process. Sometimes they have different intake. Still requires handoffs and follow-ups. And the process is really optimized for the efficiency of the service team. And this came out of some of the models that we had before, because these teams had to be super deep and super technical, and there wasn't a lot of people there. So it was a very resource and skill constrained system. The new and improved way, though, is with some of our newer processes, cultures, and tools, is now the Agile Pod can be enabled to service themselves. Now, they still need the database folks to create the things in the right way, but now there's enough APIs and services where the Agile Pod can say, hey, I need a database, give it to me in the right way, and I don't need to know everything about that. We'll dig into that example a little more later. So the key thing is and you can track, is there's no handoffs. There's no waiting on someone here. The process is optimized for the efficiency of the Agile Pod. And so where things take time, those things are either the 80% case is taken care for and automated as self-service, and you're just dealing with the exceptions, or the whole process where you can request whatever you need and you get it back in a fairly reasonable amount of time, usually in the time frame of minutes, hours, not days and weeks. So here's some more specific examples, because I think it's important. Everyone talks about the kind of culture and high level, but want to get a little deeper and to give you guys some specific things that you could do if you're looking to try to implement some of these strategies. So everyone talks about the pipeline, and this is an easy one, but adding stages and checks to the pipeline is the best place on where the developers live. So do your static code scanning there. Do security configuration and vulnerability management. If you give the developers the feedback that they've done something that has a vulnerability, or have an super old version of Java, or included something else, if you give it to them in the pipeline, they're still there, they're still in their development workflow, they still probably remembered what you're talking about. That gives them, you have a much higher success rate of doing that there rather than seeing a report a month or two after the fact. Another one is for things that require kind of SME knowledge or special access, like we don't want to give our developers access to all the stuff on the network or the database, is create a job or an API. So if you need a database, give them an API to call that has the parameters that they need, that's in the developer terms, and that way they can provision them themselves. And sometimes someone said there's a lot of variation, but usually there's an 80 to 90% case that everybody wants. And then if you have to do something off cycle for like the 10% case that's very different, then that's fine. But you've enabled the 80% case of all those development pods to keep going. The second thing is reference CI and CD pipelines. And I think we've learned this through a few different mechanisms is forcing everyone to start off with a very good pipeline and learn all that and learn all the integration of the tools and, the webhooks with GitHub to kick off stuff. I won't say it's super hard, but there's just a lot of different things. So how do you give your applications and services a great starting point where they get 80, 90% of what they need and they don't need to figure that out? You don't have to lock them into that. Maybe they can enhance and grow it for what they need, but they don't have to do all the stuff that everyone should be doing, like kicking off your JUnit tests, doing your automated deployments, et cetera. And then, we talk about all the other tools that you're going to kind of have with your application to do things that you want. So, monitoring observability, centralized logging, web authentication. How do you give an automated way that's self-service or through an API to onboard yourself to that, at least to the basics that are needed? Of course, with monitoring, there's little things you need to do based on your business transactions you're trying to monitor, but you can still set up all that infrastructure by default, give the config files, onboard them. If you make that super easy and frictionless, people will just do it. If there's a lot of onboarding, someone will figure out one, but will everyone get through that? Some people will cut corners. It's just natural. So give them a way to onboard themselves at least to the core use cases, and then people will continue to do that and get the value out of this. So we talked about the cloud database setup, and I want to go a little deeper in this. So the Agile pods have access in some cases, but they don't have the knowledge, and they don't want to go wait on different teams for onboarding. A lot of developers can figure out the cloud APIs for creating a database, but they don't know the dirty details around deep Postgres settings around the vacuum cleanup. What are some of the security settings that maybe there's a security standard or policy around? Maybe you want to have all your logs or all your permissions set up a certain way. All those things can be baked into some process that they just request it and get it. And by doing that the correct way, it really enables them to move on to the other thing. The other thing in the back end is you can then track that, whether it's through the cloud APIs you already have, or even creating your own kind of metadata store of, hey, app team XYZ created this database. If you don't want people creating like 5 of these, because they shouldn't, then you can kind of track that and notify that if there's some additional parameters where they get out of bounds. But the liberation of the Agile pods of just getting their database within minutes or hours of them needing it is huge, rather than them waiting for some team to come back. That team has a backlog. That team has other priorities and escalations. It's just a much better experience. So the second one is networking. So, and this is an interesting one that I think we've learned more than we've thought we'd learn. So, the applications, especially ones that have lived long over time, they tend not to know what all they connect to and their dependencies are. Those tend to grow over time. So when you get to projects where you want to find out who's talking to you or who you're talking to, it tends to require some networking folks, a lot of tribal knowledge, et cetera. And the network is kind of a black box, right? If there's any issue with performance and we can't figure out, we just blame the network, right? So one of the things is now with a lot of the tools, even on-prem or in the cloud, is give your teams the visibility to that data and have them show, hey, from the network perspective, here's what you're talking to, here's where your dependencies are. And you can take that information and democratize it out to the Agile pods. Now, the thing is, you do need to do it in a way that's in their language. So the development team isn't going to memorize IP addresses, right, or CIDR blocks. That's not, we talked about how they don't like networking. That's what they really don't like. But how do you maybe enrich your data to have application names, hey, and do a mapping of, hey, this IP address maps to this application name, or it's talking to this zone or this region. If you enable them to do that, they can do a lot more work on their own without being stuck saying, hey, why can't I talk to XYZ, right? I'm trying to talk to the service I'm supposed to talk to. I can't. I have no information to do it. So this is a way to enable them to give them that information around that.
So as we kind of look back on our journey and think about the things that were critical to where we are today, and what are the pieces that we still need to improve on, we've identified a few musts, if you will. So the first we touched on earlier is really trying to establish that regular communication between the application teams and operations. I think there's a number of different ways you can go about this, whether it's co-locating and combining them into one team, or establishing regular S2s. So there's constant communication of, hey, what are you working on? Hey, how are you, thinking through some of the challenges and perspectives of each of the groups. Like I said, I think there's multiple ways that you can solve that problem, but making sure that those two groups are really, talking to each other and, really aware of what the other group is thinking of is going to be very critical as you progress on this journey. The other piece that Mark just touched on was establishing a common deployment pipeline. And this becomes critical, especially when you're working with a large number of teams. Obviously, if you only have 2 teams in your organization, it's probably not as big of a deal. But as you're looking to scale and roll this out across an enterprise, having that commonality helps you drive that consistency and makes it easier to troubleshoot when problems are encountered. And we talked about how the teams can contribute back to benefit the greater good, and you end up taking a product from good to great. The other piece is including testing as part of the pipeline. As we talked about, one of the main goals of DevOps is to really shorten the feedback loop and make sure that the developers are understanding whether or not their code is working as intended and identifying some of the gotchas earlier. As we like to say, it's much easier and cheaper to fix things in dev than it is in prod. So anytime we can catch those issues earlier in the game, that's going to, be better. And, we're able to get that feedback to the developers before they've moved on to something else and have completely forgotten about, what they were working on. And this is also something that ties back into, Agile versus DevOps, right? In both cases, we want to be failing early and often. We want to make sure that, we're identifying those issues and building incrementally and making sure that we're continuously improving on our products and our development cycle. Next one is setting up monitoring. Obviously, if you can't tell if something is broken, then you can't go and fix it. So whether you're having logs that are being set up, whether you're leveraging dashboards to see how things are performing, having that information to know when to act or where to act, is going to be helpful, and also ties back into your feedback loops, right? If things are not working as intended, you want to know that quickly so that people can jump in and make those changes. Some additional must-haves. This one is hopefully obvious to most folks, is keeping all of your artifacts in a version code repository. Obviously, being able to keep track of things makes it very helpful, so you can roll back easier, so you can identify what changed, you can see the changes. Just having all of that in one place and being able to quickly find it when you need it is super helpful. You don't ever want the case where something is stored on someone's local repository on their laptop and they're on a 3-week vacation in Europe and no one can get a hold of them. So obviously having everything in one location is great. Establishing a you build it, you own it mentality. So I think this is the end goal for everyone as they embark on a DevOps journey. But it's definitely not achievable from day one, right? I mean, we're not going to be able to, move everyone on the first day and be like, all right, well, we're not going to have an operations team, developers, you need to support this going forward. I mean, that's certainly not where we want to go, and that's not where we want to be on day one. But getting to that mentality where folks are building things that they would feel comfortable supporting, that they have built it in a way that they know all of the ins and outs, and there's no gotchas once it goes live into production. I think that's the mentality that we want to drive towards. And the last point is business needs to be included in the journey. So we talked about how product managers and owners may not understand how to prioritize some of that investment work that's needed, right? The team needs to take time out to work on their pipeline, or they need to set up some monitoring or whatever it might be. So giving some education on the goals that we're trying to achieve with this journey and the what's in it for them, the WIFM. I think is very helpful for those folks, because the more that they can understand, they can help and be supportive and be advocates for the team. The other piece is that leadership team obviously needs to be an advocate as well to help support those areas. There are some things that we may need to go slower in the short term to get faster in the long run. So making sure that leadership is on board and supporting the teams is really going to help with that journey. It's really difficult to try and do this as a completely grassroots movement. So having everyone be on the same page, everyone be supportive of the journey is going to be critical to the success of embracing DevOps. And I just wanted to share with you a quote that I really like from Juz Humble. So DevOps is not a goal, but a never-ending process of continual improvement. I think that this is definitely a journey, and I recently listened to a talk where people talked about the imposter syndrome, that we tend to go to these conferences or tend to listen to these talks where folks are saying, well, this is how you do it, and this is where we are, and it makes it feel like, man, maybe we're really behind on this, or they figured it out, why can't we? I think it's a continual improvement, right? It is a journey, and I don't think that anyone has all of the answers or has figured it out perfectly for every single use case. So I think as long as you're continuing to make incremental improvements and really trying to get to that overarching goal, you're doing great. And we're continuing on our journey, and I know we're not quite at our destination yet, but we continue every day to figure out what can take us one step closer to where we want to be, and moving that goal and continuing to push ourselves is definitely part of this journey that we're on. So with that, just like we started off our story as once upon a time, we have to end it with the typical storytelling ending of "They lived happily ever after." So with that, thank you so much. I think we've saved some time for some questions. I think.
Yes, Jessica, thank you so much. That was very thorough, and we do have some questions that came in. First question is, have you tried at Capital One or considered the ideas in Google's take on DevOps called Site Reliability Engineering, SRE?
So yeah, we have some of those set up, some groups that are trying to implement those practices, and in the similar mindset of, hey, how do we create some products for everyone to have the right monitoring, alerting built in? So it's similar to our DevOps journey. I think it's we're into it. We've learned a lot, but we have a lot further to go in our journey.
Okay, great. Another question. What would you say is the main reason why enterprises fail at DevOps?
So, and this is my point of view, I think the one thing with DevOps is if you still have kind of the silos and the handoffs, you really you're only going to optimize some of the work within those little sections, and you're not going to get the true flow and feedback. So that's where kind of talked about the shift from the Agile pod going to the individual services teams to have the service teams either building a product for whatever they do or a self-service mechanism, or even if they can't do that, flip the engagement model of being, hey, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to do whatever I do great, right? Like security and protecting whatever data is important to you. But I'm going to come into your space and help you do it in a way that's optimized to you as an Agile pod, not that's efficient to me over here. And by doing that, you'll get flow and the speed aspects, and that will speed everything up. And the feedback on it, you'll be able to do changes faster, et cetera. So I think that's one of the challenges. You can't do it all at once, I understand, but slowly working those handoffs out of the system, especially for the common cases. Like I think everyone is probably building some sort of RESTful service for whatever their company does, and you're going to build a lot of those. How do you stamp those out and have that 80% process super optimized And then you can worry about that 20% that's the corner cases, right? I mean, it's a lot harder to do for stuff that is like super secure, like maybe your PCI areas. And that's fine if you want to, it's fine. You want to go deep in there and have a much deeper engagement with your security team and your PCI type team. But if you can do the automation and the flow on the other teams, that will free up those resources to focus on that really critical work that you got to get right.
Awesome. What about if you've been working in DevOps already? What are some of the more advanced skills, tools that DevOps teams should be incorporating?
So I think, I know they don't like it, but I do think some basic networking knowledge helps everyone, especially as the developers are kind of getting into it. I wouldn't expect them to be an expert in any way, but making sure to kind of know the language. That way you get more ability to, to troubleshoot, et cetera. I think it's really almost a engineering passion of just kind of being able to learn a lot of things, but not having to go deep in it. If you look at the DevOps tool set and the cloud, essentially what they've done is taken some things that are super specialized and deep and brought them up to a level where developers or any of the type of skills can learn them enough to be useful for them. So I would say really that be able to learn something new. I talk kind of like T-type people where you have a lot of breadth along a lot of technologies, but you might not be super deep, right? A developer is not going to be probably super deep in security or databases or networking, but they're deep in development. So if you can make sure you have that skill of, the passion of learning something new to enough level to be to enable yourself, I think that's one of the key skills.
Cool. We have Steven with another question. How does you build it, you own it work with vendors?
Very carefully.
Great.
So all joking aside, yeah, that is tougher. I think the big thing about you build it, you own it is how do you not have the handoff that, hey, it's someone else's job to run and operate it and they're accountable for the answers to it. I think one of the big things in you build it, you own it is having a passion for your outcome and how it runs. Even if maybe like with a vendor, you don't have access to, you're not actually doing the running, but are you pushing on what are my SLOs? Are we measuring those? Have I defined those for the vendor? And do I review those? And do I care about those when those are missed? And do I not say, hey, that's the vendor problem? That's like, hey, like, do I have something in my application or in my embedded monitoring that I need to improve to make that a better outcome? I do, vendors are going to make it more challenging, but in my mind, you can't outsource the accountability. In the end, whether your vendor runs it or you run it, someone's going to look to you and your company as to the outcome, and if it's not available or has bugs or errors. So you might not be able to go all the way for that, but I would also say I think you can still take that methodology of I'm going to care about those details of that outcome, and I'm going to make sure also I do everything from a software development perspective and internal monitoring to help that vendor, rather than saying, hey, I threw it over the wall, vendor, you got it. You guys do the whatever MBRs you do, right, and readouts. Letting say, hey, you go do that. No, you need to be standing side by side and say, hey, I'm accountable with this person. It's my app. So.
Okay, great. What do you think are the blind spots of DevOps?
I think it's a challenging one. I think talked a little bit about if you're not willing to change how you work, forget about the tools, but how you work organizationally. And let me really crisp before I get blamed for an org change. I don't think you need to do a reorg to do this, but I do think how you swarm around work does need to change, and you need to slowly chip away at that. And if you're going into it not open to changing, you don't have to change everything up front, but to do that, then I'm not sure you're going to get the value. You're not going to get near the value out of it. So I think that's, kind of one thing. I know I kind of said it before. I'd say the other thing, and I'm not sure if it's a blind spot, but it's awareness, is a lot of the tools are new and there's not, I would say the tool landscape isn't settled down, and I'm not sure it will. I wouldn't get married to a particular tool. I mean, yes, pick a tool, but you're not making a decision for like 10 years that you might have done before at an enterprise. You might be making a 2 to 3 year commitment. Like your favorite tool might be acquired by someone else, and you don't like the direction that company might be fundamentally different. So I think where before we sat down and we did a lot of planning and a lot of prep and made some very big choices saying, hey, we don't want to reevaluate that again. I think kind of maybe to the agile stuff that Jessica talked about is you're probably going to say, hey, I need to make a choice and move on, but my horizon is 2 years, right? Because that landscape might change and I might need it readdressed. So I think that's one of the things that I do see, and I've had to change my thoughts and mentality on is, test and experiment and make choices, but not say, hey, we're going to lock ourselves in forever and not readdress this again.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions, if that's all right with you guys. What level
I think
of
we can
engagement?
do probably one more.
One more? Okay. Let me pick
more.
it then.
Pick the best one.
Just reading them through. We got quite a few questions in while you were answering this last one. We're a traditional ITIL organization. Is there anything different that you would suggest for us to get started with the transition to DevOps culture?
Can you say that again? I missed the first part. You broke up a little.
We're a traditional ITIL organization. Is there anything different that you would suggest for us to get started with the transition to DevOps culture?
So this might be an interesting one, and I'm not sure about the particular organization that this person asks, but I would say there's a lot of great information in the ITIL systems. And one of the things that it might be a little more cloud and automation, but it fits in the DevOps is, I would say making sure you have some APIs in front of those information silos so you can start to pull together that information and other people can query that. And it seems, I use the example, like the power of an API is huge where it enables someone else to start doing that self-servicing for them, where you might have a very much more, I would say, firmer and lengthy process. Now you can have, whether it's the ITIL group writing some of the automation to enable some of the other people using it, or others like, hey, I want to create a change request and pre-populate it with some of the necessary things. So make sure my information is right, version number, tagging. I think some of that, and a lot of the tools have them now, but having some sort of API and leveraging that, because a lot of your information is baked in there, especially around the CMDB systems, et cetera. But I think if you do that and make sure you leverage it, you can start to get some of those gains and pull that information together and not have it be as manually process driven if that's one of the problems you're running into.
Okay, so thank you so much, Mark and Jessica, for being with us today. And it's been a really great session. Well, we're very happy to have you with us. And also many thanks to everyone that joined us. We will notify you once the webinar is available. And if you're looking to accelerate your DevOps journey, visit us at cloudacademy.com. Thank you and goodbye.